20, 25 minutes maybe, we're going to walk through these three things you see on your screen. What are the emerging technology trends and strategy revisions that we think are going to be coming around in generative AI, of course, but also broadly across IT services and consulting. We'll talk about which are the companies that are outpacing others in this space, and then we're going to talk about things that have stood out to us. And the reason that we're saying ideas and promises and capabilities, it's because the three of us have been traveling quite a bit in the first few months of 2024. Opportunity to be in front of our clients, opportunity for us to be in front of their clients and hear everything that's happening around both generative AI, but again, consulting and technology and IT services and cloud and everything broadly. So we're going to share a lot of the different things that we've seen. We actually initially thought of this presentation as sort of the tales from the road, and then we actually shifted it over to the hangover. Is the hangover here on GenAI, which I think is kind of amazing since we're barely over a year into this, but that hype was so relentless through all of 2023. So who are you going to hear from today? It's really important to understand if you're new to these webinars, if you're new to technology business research, we come at this with three different perspectives. Although we're all here at TBR, we're all focused on different companies. And I say that because it's important to understand that our research begins with the individual companies, understanding the strategy, the business model, and the performance of each of the companies that we cover, and then building up a broader view of the market. So when we are talking about generative AI, we're not talking about it from the top down. We're not talking about it as an idea or a technology. We're talking about it as part of the business strategy, the business model, and the performance of the companies we cover. Boz, for example, is our lead on Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, and Infosys when it comes to company coverage. And Kelly is our lead on HCL Tech, Fujitsu, McKinsey, EY, PwC, and I'm probably forgetting a couple. So if you have questions about those companies specifically, or if you have questions about any of their peers, of course, you're welcome to put those questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. We also happen to have a special guest in the studio with us today. We have Katie Merrill from our cloud software team. Her coverage includes, I'm not even sure who, AWS, yep, AWS, Google, and a handful of other, Workday as well? Oracle as well. So if you have questions about those companies, feel free to reach out. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to talk about the first 18 months of generative AI, and then we're going to talk about what's going on right now and in the near term for the next 18 months. And then we'll take the long view of generative AI, and then we'll look again at some of those changes that we're seeing from the different companies who we believe is leading in the space. And we'll look at things, ideas, just sort of concepts, stuff that we've heard over the last few months as we've been traveling. So what's been going on for the last 18 months with respect to generative AI? Well, it's been hype and just relentless hype. And I think it's true that everybody knows something and nobody knows anything. And by that, I mean, a lot of the companies have invested heavily in training their people. They've invested in building up generative AI capabilities, but everybody that's good at it is staying with their own lane. And not anyone has a full grasp of the entirety of the generative AI picture, whether that's the risks, the opportunities, where it's going to be heading. So we spent the first 18 months of the generative AI era really just getting relentlessly hyped on what's going on. And we saw a lot of the proof of concepts that did come out in early 2023 and all the way through the earlier part of this year. Those proof of concepts really showed us how much there's the opportunity for generative AI, but also where are the costs and how much more expensive generative AI is going to be for enterprises that go to adopt it. And what the costs are for those providers who are building up their capabilities around generative AI. We also saw what you can sort of learn from the hyperscalers board on the cloud era, and you can apply that to generative AI, where we saw these startups that begun to threaten the hyperscalers and their ability to spin the meter on cloud services until those hyperscalers adjusted their own business models and adjusted the way that they think about and approach generative AI. And so we saw this sort of tension early on. I think that's sort of settled out now. And then we also saw the consultancies and the IT services vendors, in particular the consultancies, talking about industry expertise as where they were able to bring their value to the table. So since they're not, they're not the infrastructure players, they're not building large language models, what they do have is they have industry expertise. It's kind of the oldest story in the book when you think about consultancies. It's what consultancies were built on, being industry experts. But when it came around to generative AI, they were at the forefront of saying that all these solutions are great, but it's not a horizontal. You need to be able to apply it within a specific industry, within a sub-industry. And we think going forward, that's going to be one of the important, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think that's one of the important things we'll see is this emergence of industry-specific small large language models or enterprise-specific small large language models, and more importantly, industry Gen AI that is going to mirror what we've seen with the cloud industry clouds. So that then leads us to the advent of GPU as a service. And here I'll welcome Boz to have a few comments on that.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone on the call today. So the GPU as a service, I think the biggest there's two things to consider here. Is as we look into the broader ecosystem, is there's definitely a new wave of contenders that we're starting to see, more like a smaller startups like companies that are coming to the market. So the ecosystem is expanding and is presenting new opportunities for the established incumbents. But it's also presenting a challenge, as especially when it comes to discussing those opportunities with the buyers, because over the last decade plus, they've all been looking into moving to cloud and accounting for shifting from CapEx to OpEx and that opportunity around that business model evolution. And now it's yet another technology to account for. The other piece here is, as my colleague and friend here, Katie Mayo, pointed out earlier in the conversation, the play of NVIDIA when it comes to GPUs and then GPU as a services. Really NVIDIA is trying to position itself from the get-go to not to be just seeing yet another hardware provider, but trying to think and bring in more of a business value to the broader ecosystem and the stakeholders that are part of it. So it's a trend that we're starting to observe. I'm sure it will be a trend to continue. We're getting already a lot of questions when it comes to the ecosystem expansion. So that's just something to keep an eye on. Yeah.
Do we want to define GPU?
We want to define GPU.
Yeah.
It is just stumbled me on a processing unit. It's the Jesus. Now I'm getting graphic processing unit. Yes. Sorry, I got stumbled a little more. Graphic processing unit. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah.
And there are some other questions in the Q&A coming in, and great, we will get to them at the end. So what's going to happen over the next 18 months? I think when I think about this question, I think about where we are right now, and when I think about everyone that we talk to and their interest in seeing generative AI move from out of pilot stage, out of use case purgatory here, and to actually going to scale, I'm reminded of, and I'm going to date myself as the oldest person in the room by a lot, waiting around for something to load on a PlayStation. So back in the day, when, for those of us that are really old, you had an Atari, you put the cartridge in, bam, it fired up right away. And then we got to PlayStations and you had to sit around and wait forever for the game to load. That's sort of where we are right now with generative AI, where the demand to have data usable, available, usable, and permissioned is what is sort of holding up a lot of the opportunity around generative AI. It's actually also creating massive opportunity for the consultancies and the IT services vendors who are able to help with that orchestration and the cleansing and moving data and putting it where it needs to be. But the result is, because generative AI is so dependent on good data, we're really in a sort of a period where we're waiting around for all that data to be cleaned up and make more useful. Or the alternative, of course, is just doing small things on smaller large language models, doing smaller data sets. And actually, that's where we're seeing a lot of the more successful early use cases, are where when enterprises are adopting generative AI solutions within a silo, within a particular service line. So that's sort of the first part of it. With respect to the regulatory environment, I think the most important thing to think about is when we think of generative AI, we talk about responsible AI. And that's not a term that's ever put in front of blockchain. It's not put in front of 5G. It's not put in front of cloud. Nobody thinks about AI. Nobody thinks about those technologies in a responsible kind of way. But we do think about that with respect to generative AI. And I think that's where you're going to see the regulatory pressures are going to continue to grow. It already starting, Europe is already certainly ahead of the US in this regard. I think we'll continue to see, again, sort of leaps and lulls. I didn't want to say fits and starts, because I don't think they're going to be fits so much. It's just going to be, things are going to come into place with respect to regulation. It's going to force a lot of companies to adjust their own business models. By companies, I mean the companies in the generative AI ecosystem. And then the long tail of this, and this is going to last for more than 18 months, of course, is going to be the opportunity for governance, risk, and compliance around generative AI that's going to be an opportunity for the IT services vendors and in particular the consultancies. And then I think another thing that we're already seeing now is this idea that the people who are using generative AI are actually going to replace the people who is going to replace the idea of generative AI replacing people. So that's super confusing. And let me try and say it slower and more clearly. Early on, the fear of generative AI was that generative AI was going to replace jobs. It was going to replace people. It was going to make jobs redundant. It was going to do all those. It wasn't going to do just the easy automated tasks. It was going to do more and replace people. What we're now seeing clearly, and plenty of people predicted, was it was really the people who adopted the technology, who adapted to the ability to use generative AI in their day-to-day that are replacing this idea of generative AI just replacing everybody. So, and I think we'll continue to see that over the next 18 months. And then lastly, turning the ISVs into industry tech consultants. Again, I'll turn to Boz on this one. Boz?
Well, the idea here is the ISVs becoming tech consultants or industry tech consultants. We're starting to your point earlier about the industry cloud, right, and the evolution of how the cloud model evolved, and ISVs trying to think creatively how to package their offerings when it comes to Gen AI, and the idea of trying to layer up, the industry specialization within their package multi-product solutions, essentially, right? We know that all the ISVs and even the hyperscalers have tried in the past, and some of them will continue to expand their professional services arms, essentially, and they're starting to add some of that specialization. So it's an idea. I think everyone is trying to protect their turf, but also some of them are trying to position themselves as more of the go-to partner for all things Gen AI, including industry specialization. So while at the moment we continue to discuss the importance of ecosystems and how vendors manage their partner ecosystem, Gen AI might start feather some relationships and shake things up to a degree, depending on how much vendors really decide to go outside their swim lane and how they position themselves taking advantage of Gen AI, and how much they're trying to experiment with areas that they may not be known for. We saw Salesforce this morning, last night, they missed their revenue estimates the first time since 2006, I think. So those companies will not give up just like that. So they'll try to do anything and everything to continue to push forward.
Although if you've listened to many of our webinars, you'll know that going outside your swim lane is something we highly recommend against. It's something we in our research have seen over and over again. The companies that do what they do well and stay in their swim lane do the best. So let's step back and take the long view. And I'm going to ask Kelly and Boz to both weigh in on this, but I'll grab a couple of these off of here and some thoughts that I have when I think of where generative AI is going to be in 5 years. And I have that question at the beginning: what happens when a technology delivers on its promise? Very specifically because of the undercurrent we've been hearing now for over a year from clients and from IT services vendors and consultancies around the dissatisfaction with what technology has delivered, that the adoption of cloud hasn't delivered everything, especially not the cost savings that it was supposed to. Blockchain, we're in a blockchain winter again, I think. But what happens when generative AI actually delivers? Where would we be if generative AI actually does do what everyone was predicting early last year, and what people are beginning to see the possibilities are as some of the use cases go to scale? And I think I'll grab a couple of these. I think the skills-based workers displacing knowledge workers, meaning that people who are trained on specific things that are able to do that have the skills to use technologies, that have the skills that they can apply to business problems in an enterprise, will displace this idea of being a knowledge worker. Just so, because knowledge is simply a chatbot away. I mean, you can, of course, you have to trust the chatbot, but that's a whole nother webinar. But if knowledge is something that is you no longer need to accumulate over time in order to be valuable, it's really the skills, then we're going to see a displacement there. I think that's initial. That's why I have for a bit. I think that's initially true. I think long term, we're going to see where it's the experience, it's the soft skill of applying technology in a business environment. It's the ability to see, I hate to say see around the corner, it's such a cliche, but the ability to see what the long-term secondary implications are of decisions that you're making, which I don't think generative AI is going to be as good at. That's where knowledge workers are going to come back. And I think we'll also see the last one. I think generative AI is certainly going to lead to an opportunity for blockchain to become more relevant again. more, I'd say more relevant in the sense of beyond the crypto space, back to the promise of what we saw from blockchain early on around supplies, around smart contract, supply chain, smart contracts, procurement, all of those kind of things. And then we have heard from many companies that are betting on and expecting an emergence of quantum AI and what that will mean across the ecosystem. Boz or Kelly, you want to jump in on any one of these?
Yeah, sure. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Patrick. I think just kind of building off what he was talking about a little bit with the skills-based employees and kind of the training piece. I think one of the stronger uses we've seen around for generative AI is kind of applying it for productivity purposes. So kind of using it for those tools to assist with daily workflows, as well as overall project management. I think as we're seeing more of the uses around generative AI, applying it for things such as like application development and kind of working through streamlining workflows and processes. I think that's where we're going to kind of see it a bit stronger when looking at the LLMs. Additionally, looking at the use of, excuse me, looking at the use of generative AI in terms of training, where previously we were bringing people in to train like an actual person in the room executing the training. I think combining the generative AI and using the large language models, companies are now able to kind of train using those technologies to kind of create the training program all through it, so that there's no need for an actual person in the room. And the quality might not be quite the same, but I think the idea of bringing it all there, you're able to execute on it a bit more quickly than you were previously. So I think kind of working on those to assist with productivity, as well as kind of focusing on building the skills to help, as Patrick was alluding to before, progress further and open up for new areas.
Excellent. Boz?
Yeah, I think the only one thing I'll add to the blockchain piece is the idea behind blockchain kind of resurgence is all the data has to be verified. And it has to be trusted. The large language models have to be trusted. So if there hasn't been a killer app for blockchain, I think GenAI could present the opportunity for, as long as it can depart from its kind of a bad press and bad cousins and whatnot that may have experienced in the last decade, I would say. But yeah, I think there's so much more potential for blockchain to be embedded as part of the large language model development and the need for verification.
Yeah, and I'll touch on one last one here, and then we can move on, and that's the consultancies and the governance, risk, and compliance revenue stream. We've been saying this for a while now, for as long as we've been talking about generative AI, that that the need for it to be trusted, verified, for the data to be cleansed, for all the reasons that you have governance, risk, and compliance are even, I guess, greater, or whatever fold, 10-fold, 20-fold, 100-fold more true with respect to generative AI. So that is where those firms, in particular the big four firms that have had governance, risk, and compliance as part of their DNA and have been building practices around that for a long time, will see a very long, steady revenue stream of work around governance, risk, and compliance with respect to generative AI. So with that, I'm not sure, am I going to Boz or Kelly for the next one?
Yeah, I can start here. So I think you already kind of start opening up, thinking about the vendors. And as Patrick mentioned, we all three of us have been traveling on the first half of 2024 and with attending events and meeting with clients, with management consultancies, India-centric vendors, technology vendors, IT services vendors. So we kind of had that firsthand discussions with clients, partners, vendors themselves, and trying to get a better sense of like what's going on in the space and who is thinking how when it comes to GenAI. So the big four, the management consultancies Patrick mentioned, the GRC, the governance and compliance opportunity is certainly a long tail, but one particular area that we started to kind of detect from those in the conversations with those vendors is the need for them to pivot from having a discussion away from cost reduction and bending that cost curve down when it comes to GenAI, and looking to GenAI, positioning GenAI as the revenue growth driver for their clients, kind of value creation and what way is going to come next. So the messaging is getting calibrated. We heard from KPMG, we heard from PwC, EY as well. So it's really an opportunity for how vendors are positioning themselves within the ecosystem. So those companies certainly you can argue, I mean, the management consulting space have been stalled when it comes to pure management consulting services revenue. So it's a good way to start having different conversations with their clients and have them think about where else can they drive revenue for themselves. So it's kind of a self-supporting hypothesis and messaging that they're driving, but it's something to keep an eye on for. Someone like Accenture, it's certainly a company that maintains that, household name status when it comes to the IT buyer. They are typical Accenture mode, continues to invest within their portfolio. They've been rotating their skills base. When it comes to GenAI, they certainly are not shying away to plant some seeds and pay some ways when it comes to their domain-specific large language models, thinking about industry specialization that Patrick mentioned earlier, some of their portfolio investments, the rotational skills and training can be skilling. A lot of it's occurring through acquisitions, both in the legacy areas like supply chain and cybersecurity, but also in GenAI specific capabilities that they're adding skills around. So even though if you look at the Accenture's financial performance in the last 6 to 9 months, you're like, oh, what's going on with this company that has always been growing so fast? I would not just be like, I'll be cautious about making, bets against Accenture just by the nature of how well they're presented and positioned within the enterprise buyers. Indie-centric vendors, they continue to adjust and calibrate. Good example here is Infosys. Had a chance to spend some time with Infosys in early spring, and hear their story around GenAI and their relationship with Oracle and some of the other partners that are on site during the event. It was certainly, a company that a lot of the success is coming down to how the culture has evolved within its organization. And again, even though the performance is, low to mid single digits, but it's pretty much where the market is right now from an IT service perspective. They have a pretty robust pipeline, and their appetite for innovation is measured, yet continues to evolve, and they kind of continue to invest a lot into their kind of like chip to cloud strategy, starting to invest in skills when it comes to silicon design services and trying to be better positioned for what we mentioned earlier, the whole GPU as a service trend and what's going on in the marketplace, starting to add the skills that they will be needed as if, when clients decide to move into more of a GPU support, workloads versus CPU workloads. So they're trying to find that balance and they pursue those investments. So all the companies are trying to fulfill and support their ongoing strategies with the gradual yet measured calibration of this investments profiles when it comes to the GenAI. Kelly, do you want to comment on Fujitsu on that slide here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Buzz. Looking at Fujitsu, I think the main call out for them is the Fujitsu, their Kazuchi platform, which is an AI platform, which is focused on the large enterprises, but it's more, it was initially designed for the easily adoptable platforms, but it's for more easily adoptable enterprises, but it's also designed for other clients as well. I think the main call out here is that it does bring together Fujitsu's experience with compute power, as well as bringing in the experience with LLMs and their experience just around computing and AI in general. The platform kind of builds off of Fujitsu's experience with their digital Analyst platform. It kind of progresses and enables them to deliver on additional services. But yeah, so with that,
let's see if Katie wanted to comment on that slide as well as the issues here with us. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Katie Merrill, Senior Analyst on the Cloud Practice. Just joining my services colleagues here. I think in terms of vendors that we see kind of quote unquote winning this, if I'm looking a year out, obviously Microsoft, very early lead here. I think how they've accounted for the data play with Microsoft Fabric is extremely competitive and something other competitors should take note of. We were at Informatica World last week, and there was a lot of discussion on how Microsoft is leveraging data partners like Informatica to integrate with Fabric. So, despite Microsoft saying that Fabric is really a one-stop end-to-end platform for all things data, serving the entire data lifecycle, they clearly recognize their gaps. And so I think partnering with those data pure plays to really fuel that data story and get to the heart of what customers are trying to do with their data around things like observability and quality in GenAI is really important. And then Oracle also sticks out. Just when I look at, OCI GenAI service is still new and emerging, but when I look at how that powers the entire stack with, database and also the Fusion applications, we really don't see any other players that have that full stack capability. So I'll just call out Microsoft and Oracle as two definitely players to watch for.
I think to the next one, we had the last bullet point, cloud ISVs infrastructure, who partners best wins. Katie's going to mention a couple of names. I'm going to say on the services side, let's see, because we have actually in the field right now a research, it's called Voice of the Partner. We are conducting a survey with US focus with alliance managers or executives within organizations that are really overseeing the relationship with their counterparts across different groups. So we have the research is focused on OEMs, cloud providers, and professional services. So we're trying to gauge that sentiment analysis about what partners think of each other when they're not in the same room. So we're trying to better understand what's missing, what's challenging, and how to partner better, essentially. So that research should be publishing by early summer, towards the end of June, early July. So again, pending data ingestion, but that's kind of like, so that last bullet is kind of a little bit of plugging here for what's coming from the research perspective.
Absolutely. All right. And I know we're almost up on time, so we're going to go through a few things very quickly here at the end. Boz, you want to start on this?
Yeah, really, the way I'll position this slide is think about Copilot and summarizing what we just talked about on the previous slide, because the amalgamated AI, that's a strategy from Fujitsu. The shifting from I to R within the GenAI ROIs, that discussion that we had from investment to return right now is how management consultancies are thinking about everybody made this big splashy investments, 2 billion, 3 billion, 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion in the last 18 months. Now it's about the return on those billions of dollars. So that's kind of that. Let's think about GenAI as a growth driver, essentially. The rise of the chief AI officer and demand for fewer, not more technology is something we started to hear about from the India-centric vendors, for Infosys, from some of the management consultancies as well. But it's about understanding like who's the buyer persona and who leans onto existing and established relationships versus trying to drive new conversations with and building new relationships as well. The risk, data, and talent, we talked about that already throughout the deck, and I think it's a trend that will continue. It's the biggest barrier, continues to be the biggest barrier when we talk to enterprise buyers for scaling GenAI. But just like any new technology, it's going to be allowed. There will be barriers, and there will be early adopters, there will be slow, early movers, and things will move in different speeds. But it's certainly, GenAI is not immune to any of those established barriers when it comes to adoption. And then responsible, sustainable, and safe AI. I mean, that's the gist of it. I mean, if anyone can set it up the right way from a vendor perspective, from a regulatory perspective, those are the big topics that everyone is kind of grappling with right now. But again, it's really a Copilot summarization of the slide 7 and previous slide that we had here on the slide.
Excellent, thanks. And so then we do want to talk about the client retention, digital transformation, and the business unit destruction part of this as well. And I'll start off on this slide by just noting that business, particularly the business that we look at, and I would say all business, but the business that the three of us and Katie as well all look at in terms of IT services and consulting, it all still comes back to people. I mean, you still have to have people doing the work. That said, where are we going to see the most disruption? Where are we going to see business unit destruction? One of them would be procurement. I think we've been talking for a while now about what GenAI can do to procurement. I've had conversations with chief procurement officers at very large corporations that have had their own staff cut by a third or 2/3 in some cases. So it is unquestionably generative AI is going to do a lot to the whole RFP process, to the entire transparency and tracking and even the compliance and regulations around procurement. I think that'll be one of the things we'll see. Boz, you want to talk about the sustainability and the power side of this?
Yeah, so that's something that we're trying to look into, understanding the messaging around sustainability. Everybody's pushing the idea of like, okay, we know that sustainability is going to stick around. The regulatory requirements are really something that is driving conversations when it comes to sustainability. We went through that wave of like, yes, everyone's going to sustainability. They went to a law, then the regulations kind of kicked in higher gear, so everyone has to do it. But at the same time, we're saying sustainability in the era of power-hungry large language models. So how do vendors balance that messaging? How do vendors think about the broader ecosystem? So one idea that we're starting to look into, and know it's kind of a far out, is what's the role of the power companies, essentially, right? I know it's like the power grid companies, right? Is the power grid companies prepared for managing those large language models? How does that impact vendor sustainability perspectives? It's another like a dimension, it's another variable to consider. But what if, that ecosystem from IT perspective now needs to include, the electric grid companies in that, are they prepared and whatnot? So this is something that we want to kind of like raise as something to think about from a digital transformation perspective, try to think about how vendors think, encompass who's involved in the conversation, who's across the table, as everyone is easy to sell on the large language model, but the management and then the running and just everything that goes beyond, and from the power perspective, I think it's going to just require some different thinking. And especially in the era of sustainability, that may require even more than just different thinking. Some money behind as well.
Yeah, anything else to add on this one, Kelly?
Yeah, I think kind of looking at it from the Fujitsu perspective, kind of going back to the amalgamated AI piece, which I think we're thinking more of how it's bringing together the large language models and just a mixture of all the AIs. I think we're going to see a lot more use of it. I think it will definitely change a lot of the nature of how we're doing things. But I think to look at, I think some of the companies are approaching AI through the view of using it more to help, and not necessarily to trust the output, but more to just use it as a tool. So kind of like going back to what Boz was saying earlier about the whole blockchain and how we're using it more to verify and look back at that traceability piece.
And I also think we're seeing on the last bullet point there about the transformation to continuous process, I think we're seeing the consultancies in particular use generative AI as a way of thinking about a disruption to the business model that consultancies have had since forever, which is just hire smart people and throw them at a problem. And then companies themselves hiring consultancies for exactly that. Like, we've got a problem, let's just solve it. Turning that into more of, there's a continuous evolution that's going to be happening here. It's a continuous business model evolution, not just a point in time disruption. So I know we're past time, but there's one more thing we have to hit on here. And I bring this up because this is the #1 request we get from our clients, which is, tell us about the use cases that are resonating most. Tell us about the use cases that are taking off. Everyone wants to hear about use cases. And for us, I think that it's a bit of a challenge. We hate to give that consulting answer, it depends, but that's what it ends up being at the end of the day. And we think a lot of the confusion in the market around use cases is around taking a technology tool and trying to find a problem, or taking a use case and trying to apply it as broadly as possible, rather than starting with what are the business questions that are trying to be answered here, and is there a GenAI solution that helps with that? And then in particular, how you come at that and how you come at a use case and applying a use case really often depends on whether you're starting with an industry lens first, an industry lens second, a business lens first, an industry lens second, or a horizontal lens second. We have seen some pretty fascinating use cases. You two want to throw one or two out there, and I'll end with one?
Go ahead, Kai.
Yeah, sure. The first one I would kind of go with, I have briefly talked about it a little bit more earlier in the presentation, but kind of using the generative AI to facilitate with training purposes. So not necessarily taking away a whole chunk of time on the trainer side as well as on the employee side, and using the generative AI to create a whole training program for you where you can input certain like prompts, and it will, it'll not necessarily, it'll prompt a good training session and use a good framework to help with basic key terms, as well as like while you're working, it'll help you to answer quick questions, or even through Outlook using Copilot, different AI tools like that.
Yeah, for me, I think it boils down to how it's positioned. It's not, 90% of the use cases today, and I know what Patrick's going to bring up, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But when it comes to the use cases, it's all about productivity improvement, enhanced search. It's not, it's about how vendors position, the use cases. And I think that's what we have here on the last bullet. It's about positioning as towards the persona that you're selling to, because there's the universality of GenAI, regardless if you're in an industry, regardless if you're in a horizontal area, it's pretty much applies the same. So thinking about the department, if you're in a finance department, what are some of the day-to-day tasks that you do? If you're in HR, what are some of the day-to-day tasks that you do? So messaging, positioning, and labeling it, as a industry or horizontal is less of applicable. It's more about who's the persona across the table. That's the big use case for me. How to position it.
And I think, and then, so I'll end with this use case, and then we're going to go into the Q&A. So that's a cue to my colleagues here around the table to start figuring out which of the questions they want to answer first. Talk amongst yourselves. So the use case that jumps out at me that I think is fascinating, that I think is going to is the best example I think I've seen of where generative AI is going to be disruptive within a company, not only within a company, but within the ecosystem that they play in. One of the technology-heavy IT services vendors that we work with was telling us about their own application of generative AI for their marketing tools, for their collateral. So when a salesperson is going out on a call, it used to take the marketers, the marketing team, they would have to work with an ad agency or a digital marketing agency, and they would have to put together the tools, and they would have to send the different specs, and it would be this whole process to generate a deck, because the salesperson would say, I want to go talk to this client in this industry about this particular set of products and services that we have. And that all can be done so much faster now through using generative AI. And so because of course the company has uploaded or put into a large language model all of the information it has about all of its products and all the different clients in different industries and personas and all that. So you just imagine they take all of that marketing data and FUD and everything else and throw it into a large language model that then generates a lovely deck that the salesperson can take out. It takes no time. And so my first question to them was, what happens to the digital marketing agency that you were using to help do that? And it's like, well, they're gone. We just don't use them anymore. So there's an immediate cost savings. Then the other question was, well, what about the people? If suddenly the marketing team doesn't have to spend so much time, what are they going to do? And the answer was, they're going to do more. They're going to do more of what they were doing. They were always behind. They were always struggling to find the time to do stuff. And that's an interesting answer, because we've always heard that automation and artificial intelligence and analytics and now Gen AI would free people up to do higher value tasks. And this was the first time I got an honest answer, which wasn't higher value tasks. The honest answer was, oh yeah, just more of the same thing, just more of it. So I think we're going to see that application within that outcome, that business outcome, that is getting rid of an external cost and getting our people to be able to do more, is more of a realistic application of generative AI, not only for an IT services, a tech-heavy IT services vendor, but also for all of the enterprises I think that they serve. So with that, I want to show a couple things before we get to the Q&A. One, this slide is just super important to understand who we are, who we talk to, who buys our research, where you can find us, what are the kinds of use cases that people use our research for. And then in addition to the steady stream of reports that we put out on the companies that we cover and the different spaces within the technology ecosystem, such as cloud and software, IT services vendors, consultancies, even telecom, infrastructure players. In addition to that, we do an awful lot of work specifically for our clients to try and understand how we can help them position themselves in the market, not necessarily to, and very rarely to, end users, but very much to the ecosystem, helping our clients understand each other across the ecosystem. Back to what Boz was saying earlier about that voice of the partner research that's coming out soon. So with that, we will go to Q&A. I'm actually going to leave this slide up. And I think one of the questions that came in that we can tackle first would be, what are the stronger ERP vendors that are poised to take advantage of this technology? I think meaning generative AI. Anybody want to go first? Put together a thought on that. Katie, strongest?
You got this cloth and software practice here.
Which are the stronger ERP vendors?
Yeah, well, I cover Oracle, so my answer is going to be very Oracle focused. But again, I think when I mentioned earlier, the OCI GenAI service is native throughout the stack. So the Fusion ERP customers are getting those capabilities at no added cost. I mean, we can talk about GenAI pricing till we're blue in the face, but I think that's something where that detracts from what a lot of other SaaS providers are doing, such as Salesforce. And I can't speak on the part of SAP, but I would say, again, Oracle having the infrastructure service, power the database, and the ERP software being pretty competitive.
I can talk about SAP a little bit because all the companies that we work with, so the EYs and the Deloittes and the Accentures of the world, all have very large SAP practices. And one thing that we've learned over the years about SAP is how well they've been able to adjust their own portfolio and their own go-to-market around the technology and the sort of trends of the moment. And what I think has been really fascinating to see is how SAP has adjusted to the push around industry cloud, the push around industry-specific demands. So even though it's ERP, even though it's horizontal and can be applied, even though they've got their finance tools, they've got their HR tools, they've got their supply chain tools, it still can be custom fit to an industry. They had the whole model company thing for a while. I think that actually plays well into where generative AI is going. So when I think about where SAP is now and where they can go, I think they can take advantage of a lot of the trends that we've talked about with respect to generative AI. Boz, any thoughts on that?
No, I was thinking about SAP as well, just as who they are as an organization and how positioning themselves within the ecosystem. So I think it will be, the technology aspect to it's important, obviously, to make sure the technology works with the rest of the stack. I get that part. But it's also important to understand how your partners position you and how the partners, they know what you're doing as well. So educating between each other, your partners, telling the SAP story and SAP telling the UI stories is equally important as well.
Yeah, that's critical. And that gets back, that's the knowledge sharing. Which generative AI can absolutely.
You can have the greatest technology stack if you don't know how to sell it, or your partners don't know how to sell it. And
that's the key part. If your partners don't understand how to sell you, then you're missing out. So we'll do another question here. What do you find the biggest roadblock that hindering enterprises to achieve their business case targets using GenAI? So the biggest, Boz?
Yeah, I think we mentioned earlier some of the kind of the barriers for adoption, when it comes to talent, skills, privacy, governance, security. Those continue to be kind of business risk. I think it's a big component. Essentially, if you think about the public models versus the private models, I think that's an important element, how buyers are positioning and thinking about it. Obviously, the data story is critical. Using the right data, versus using the wrong data for developing the models, I think that could have a really negative impact on the enterprises. So there's a lot of discussions between the CFOs and the CISOs and the CEOs when it comes to what comes next from an enterprise perspective when it comes to GenAI and how those models are being developed, integrated with existing workloads and managed, obviously, along the way. So risk, security, privacy, talent, those are like top three, four barriers that we're continuously seeing and hearing from the buyers saying that they don't want to embark on GenAI transformation.
Kelly, anything that jumps out to you from what we've heard?
Yeah, just quickly, I think the cost is a big roadblock too, kind of figuring out what makes the most sense for them, maybe taking it piece by piece and using little pieces at first will to kind of see where it's actually the most useful before applying it full scale. I think also a lot of the vendors are approaching it through the theme of disruption and how to disrupt themselves, which is a bit more harsh, you could say. It's harder to piece through that. So I think maybe a simpler use case or business case may help a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. I think a better, simpler story around generative AI, not as disruptive, not as this sort of chaos agent within your enterprise, but and to me, it all comes back to data. I think we've seen again and again, and data is both the biggest roadblock and it's also the solution. If you can limit the data that you're using as part of your generative AI solution, sure, you're limiting yourself, but you're also allowing you're taking care of risk, you're taking care of cost, you're certainly taking care of speed. So I apologize to the person who asked that question because they want the biggest roadblock and they got at least 5 or 6 or 7, but that's just the nature where we are right now. Boz, this is for you. Can you elaborate on what you mean by replace I with R on generative AI ROI? Which I is being replaced, and what does R mean? I think it's funny because you could actually read that, Boz, to mean generative artificial and drop the I and replace that with return, which I don't think. So it's not our artificial
No, so
return.
I think that what I meant was the investment. So we mentioned how pretty much everybody, within the IT services, IT space, not just services companies, but technology companies have made big splashy announcements, investments, essentially. That's the I component. Over the last 18 months, when it comes to GenAI, in terms of portfolios, skills, partnerships, acquisitions, so on and so forth. And the first 18 months were about investment, the I component, and now it's focusing on the R, which is the return, and trying to really start making money out of it. So that was kind of and that was part of the messaging that I was trying to bring forward was the R, the return, has been also focused largely on through discussions around cost cutting, right, and optimization and productivity improvement. The R is also now starting to become a focus. The discussions around R, the return, can be, and especially those are led by some of the management consultancies, around value generation and revenue growth opportunities for the enterprises. So there's a dual speed on the R, but again, investments always come first. Although ROI, eyes in the back, and kind of like flipping the wording there. But essentially, it's like invest first. Now it's time for return, and you'd expect to see different ways for vendors to try to extract those returns. Yeah.
Excellent. And I know we're way over time. We'll do a couple more here. What is TBR views on AI on the edge on the PC with the coming Intel AMD offering for late 2024? I'll go first on this because I know the least, so everybody else can prepare what they're going to say that is going to know a lot more. And my thought on this is that AI on the edge is thinking about the technology and not thinking about the actual business problem it's going to solve. So will AI on the edge or AI on a PC make a difference? For some people, sure. Is it going to be what really drives massive revenue flows for any one of these companies that we're talking about? Is what's really going to change businesses? Probably not, because it's a technology looking for a business application. It's not looking at business problems and saying, how are we going to solve it? Now, I am positive there are people out there who are deeply involved in AI on the edge who could tell me that I'm wrong, because there are actual business problems that AI on the edge solves. But I think coming at it from AI on the edge first, or from that lens or that approach, has it backwards in terms of where the change is going to come from, where the scaled application is going to come from. Anybody else in the room want to weigh in on this one?
I agree with you on the business side of it, and I think we have a webinar from our colleagues from the infrastructure side of the house. They have a webinar, I think it's in August, that is focused on AI on the edge and kind of like the AI PCs essentially. Kelly can confirm the exact date on that webinar, but I know we have colleagues that are deeper in the weeds when it comes to AI on the edge, and they'll have a little bit more maybe who can win and who can partner better in that space.